I kissed him first. That's the part nobody ever lets me forget. Not my best friend, not my mother, and definitely not the man who was standing 10 feet away when it happened, watching with those cold gray eyes that still show up in my dreams. His name was Beckett. And the man I kissed? His twin brother, Reese. Let me back up. I was 26 when I took the job at Harlow & Associates, a mid-sized wealth management firm in downtown Chicago. Nothing glamorous. I was a junior analyst, mostly doing spreadsheet work and sitting in on meetings I wasn't allowed to speak in yet. But it paid well enough that I could finally stop splitting rent with 2 roommates in Wicker Park, and that felt like winning. Beckett Harlow was one of the partners. Not the founding partner. That was their father, Edmund Harlow, who still came in on Tuesdays, even though he was 73 and walked with a cane. Beckett ran the day-to-day operations. I'd seen him in the hallways a handful of times before we ever actually spoke. Tall, dark-haired, always in a suit that fit like it, had been personally apologized into existence by the tailor. The kind of man who made the whole room rearrange itself when he walked in. I found him intimidating. Most people did. So when he stopped at my desk one afternoon in late October and asked if I'd had time to look over the Caldwell portfolio analysis, I nearly knocked my coffee off the edge. "Yes," I said. "I sent it to your assistant this morning." He looked at me for a second, not unkindly, just assessing. Chen flagged a discrepancy in the Q3 projections. "Was that intentional?" "Yes," I said again. "There was an error in the original model. I corrected it and left a note in the margin." Another pause. Then, "Good catch." He walked away. I sat there staring at my screen for a full minute before I remembered how to breathe. That was how it started. Not romantically, not even close. It started with a spreadsheet error and a 2-word compliment from a man who didn't hand those out freely. Over the next few months, I worked on 3 more projects that fell under his oversight. He was precise, demanding, and almost entirely impossible to read, but he remembered things. He'd reference conversations from weeks ago, details I'd mentioned in passing. That felt like something. I told myself it wasn't. Then I started hoping it was. By February, we were having lunch together once a week. By March, it was twice a week, and the lunches were lasting longer than either of us had meetings to justify. He asked me to dinner the first Friday of April. A real dinner. Not a working lunch, not a client event. He said it plainly, standing at my desk at the end of the day with his jacket already on. "I'd like to take you to dinner Saturday, if you're free." I was free. We went to this small French place in River North that he'd apparently been going to since law school. The owner knew him by name. We talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with work. He'd grown up partly in London, partly in Boston, hated flying but traveled constantly, had a complicated relationship with his father that he described only as ongoing. I told him about growing up in a small town in Ohio, about how I'd worked 2 jobs all through college, about the very specific terror of being the first person in your family to move to a city where you didn't know a single soul. He listened the way some people don't bother to anymore, completely, without glancing at his phone. Walking back to where I'd parked, he stopped on the sidewalk and said, "I don't usually do this." "Do what?" "This." He gestured vaguely between us. "I'm not good at it." I laughed a little. "You seem fine to me." "I'm telling you ahead of time," he said. "So you're not surprised when I'm bad at it." That was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me on a first date. Maybe that's why I fell so quickly. Maybe I should have paid more attention to what he was actually warning me about. We dated for 4 months before he mentioned Reese. That sounds impossible now, looking back. 4 months, and somehow the topic of his twin brother never came up in a real way. I knew he had family. His father, a mother who'd passed when he and his brother were teenagers, some cousins scattered across the East Coast. He mentioned my brother, occasionally, vaguely. The way you mention a complicated piece of furniture you've had for a long time and don't quite know where to put anymore. I didn't push. People have their difficult relationships, and Beckett wasn't someone who opened doors until he was ready. In August, he invited me to his father's 74th birthday dinner. Just family, he said. His father's house in Lincoln Park, a big brownstone that had apparently been in the Harlow family for 40 years. Formal-ish, he told me. My father likes an occasion. I bought a new dress. Navy blue, simple, the kind of thing that could pass for understated elegant without actually costing what understated elegant usually costs. I was nervous in the cab over. Beckett held my hand the whole ride and didn't say much, which I'd learned by then was just how he processed things, silently, internally, in whatever locked room inside him that I still hadn't been given a key to. The house was warm and lit up when we arrived. His father was exactly as I'd imagined, imposing even with the cane, with Beckett's same gray eyes and a handshake that still meant business. He introduced me to 2 cousins whose names I immediately forgot, and to an aunt named Patricia, who told me within 4 minutes that I had good energy, and that she'd been telling Beckett for years he needed to bring someone around. Then the front door opened again. I was standing near the fireplace with a glass of wine, half listening to Patricia tell a story about a cruise she'd taken in the Baltic, when I heard Beckett's father say, across the room, "There he is." I turned, and my heart did something strange. The man who walked through the door looked exactly like Beckett. Same height, same dark hair, same sharp jaw. But there was something different in how he moved, looser, somehow, like he was less concerned with the weight of himself. He was wearing a sport coat over a dark shirt, no tie, and he smiled at his father in a way that Beckett almost never smiled. Wide, unguarded, like smiling was easy for him. I thought, that's interesting, I thought. He looks like Beckett but lighter. Then Beckett appeared at my elbow, and something in him went still. "Reese came," he said. Not to me, really. More to himself. "Your brother? My twin," he said it flatly. I didn't know he was going to be here. Before I could respond, the man Reese was making his way over. He greeted his father, clapped one of the cousins on the shoulder, and then his eyes found me and he tilted his head slightly, curious. "You must be the one," he said. Not arrogant, just easy. Like he said everything that way. "Vivienne," I said, and put my hand out. He shook it. "Rise." The less impressive Harlow, apparently. Beckett said nothing. Dinner was the 8 of us around a long table in the dining room, and I ended up seated between Patricia and one of the cousins, with Beckett across from me and Reese at the far end. The conversation was polite, the food was excellent, and Edmund Harlow told 3 different stories about the firm's early years that I could tell everyone had heard before, but nobody interrupted. Halfway through the main course, Beckett got up to take a phone call, some client situation. He mouthed to me, apologetic, and the seat across from me sat empty. Reese, I noticed, was watching the door Beckett had disappeared through. Then he looked at me. "He always does that," he said. Not accusatory, just observing. "Work follows him," I said. "It does." He refilled his wine glass and leaned back slightly in his chair. "He tell you much about me?" "Not much," I admitted. He nodded like that was exactly what he'd expected. "We're not close. Haven't been since, well, a while." He looked at his glass. "I'm glad he found someone, though, genuinely." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "Thank you. You work at the firm." I did. Junior analyst. I moved to a different firm in June. "Smart," he said. "Dating someone in your chain of command is a minefield." "That's what I figured." He smiled. Not the wide, easy smile from when he'd walked in. Something quieter. "He's lucky," he said. "He doesn't always know when he is." Beckett came back 10 minutes later, slid into his seat, touched my hand briefly in apology. The dinner continued. Reese was quiet for the rest of the evening, mostly talking to the cousins, and when people started saying their goodbyes, he hugged his father carefully, shook hands with everyone else, and left before dessert was finished. In the cab home, Beckett was even quieter than usual. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Fine. Is it weird, having him there?" He looked out the window. "We don't have the same relationship most twins do," I gathered. "There was something years ago. Business. I'd rather not. You don't have to explain." He looked at me then. Some of the tension went out of his face. "Thank you. I let it go. I shouldn't have let it go." 3 weeks later, I ran into Reese by accident at a coffee shop in the West Loop. I ducked in out of the rain, was standing in line completely soaked, and heard someone say my name. He was at a corner table with a laptop and 2 empty espresso cups, looking like he'd been there for hours. "Vivienne, hi. Hi." I laughed a little, pushing wet hair off my face. "Sorry, I look insane." "You look like it's raining outside," he said. He ended up buying my coffee. We talked for 45 minutes, about the neighborhood, about a book he was reading that I'd read 2 years ago, about the fact that we'd both grown up outside big cities and spent our entire adult lives pretending we were made for them. He asked good questions. He listened the way Beckett listened, but without that slight guardedness. that sense that he was always measuring the risk of what he was saying. I walked back out into the rain and felt something I didn't want to name. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was just that he was interesting, that it was natural to find your partner's family interesting, that there was nothing complicated about having a good conversation with someone. I was with Beckett, who had looked at me across a dinner table 4 months ago, and said I don't usually do this, like it cost him something to say it. Beckett, who texted me every morning, who had started keeping a spare phone charger at his place, because I always forgot mine, who had said 2 weeks ago, in the middle of an entirely ordinary Thursday evening, I think I'm in love with you, and then looked away, like he was embarrassed by his own honesty. I loved him. I was sure of it. I didn't second-guess that. What I second-guessed was why, for 2 weeks after that coffee shop, Rice Harlow kept showing up in my thoughts like a song you can't get out of your head, no matter how many other things you try to listen to. I didn't see him again until September. Beckett's firm had its annual client gala at a hotel in the Gold Coast, one of those events with past appetizers and a string quartet, and 100 people making small talk about things they don't care about, while really comparing notes on things they care about too much. I wore a black dress. Beckett wore his best suit and looked at me when I came out of the bathroom, like I'd surprised him, which I had learned was his specific version of a compliment. An hour into the event, while Beckett was pinned in a corner by a very persistent client, I was standing at the edge of the room near the windows when I felt, rather than saw, someone stop beside me. I turned. The light was low. There was a band that had replaced the string quartet, and the room was loud and warm, and I'd had 2 glasses of champagne, and I was tired in the way you get tired at events like that. Tired of performing ease, tired of small talk, tired of standing up straight in heels that were not made for standing. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie. He'd clearly just come from something else. There was a slight distraction in his expression, like part of him was still wherever he'd been before. He turned when I turned, and our eyes met, and before either of us could speak, I did the thing that I have spent every day since wishing I could undo. I leaned forward and kissed him, right on the mouth. Brief, instinctive, the way you kiss someone you've been missing without realizing you've been missing them. It was over in 2 seconds, maybe less. And then he pulled back slightly, and I saw his eyes, and they were gray. But they were the wrong shade of gray. And there was something in them that was not Beckett's careful restraint, but something warmer and more startled, and my entire body went cold. "Vivienne," Rhys said quietly. The room kept going around us, the band played. Somewhere behind me there was laughter. I took a step back, my face was burning. I thought you were, I know, he said, his voice was low. I know what you thought. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Is he here? I asked. My voice came out strange. He's been here all night. I turned. Across the room, through the crowd, Beckett was standing with the persistent client and 2 other people, listening to someone talk. As I watched, he glanced up, the way you do when you feel eyes on you, and found my face. He held my gaze for 1 second. Then he looked at Rhys, standing a foot away from me. Then he looked back at me, and I watched something happen to his face that I will spend a long time trying to forget. Not anger, which might have been easier. Something quieter. Something that looked, terribly, like confirmation of something he'd already suspected. He excused himself from the group. He walked toward us slowly, hands in his pockets, unhurried in the particular way of someone who has decided not to react until they've processed everything they're going to process. He stopped in front of us. "Beckett," I started. "Not here," he said. Calm, entirely, devastatingly calm. He looked at Rhys. Something passed between them that I couldn't read. Old and layered and not about me at all. "You didn't have to come tonight," Beckett said. "Edmund asked me to," Rhys said. "Right." He turned back to me. "I'm going to finish the evening. We can talk tomorrow." "Beckett, I need you to know that tomorrow," he said. And he looked at me one more time. That same assessing look from the very first time we spoke, back when I was nobody to him, back when I hadn't given him any reason to look at me any other way. And then he went back to the group. I stood there. Rhys exhaled next to me. "I'm sorry," I said. To him. I wasn't sure why, entirely, except that I was. "Don't be," he said. And then quietly, "Are you okay?" I laughed, because what else do you do? "No, do you need to leave?" "I can't leave. It's his event." Right. He looked across the room at Beckett, who was already laughing at something the client had said, because Beckett was, above everything else, a professional. He'll be fine tonight. It's tomorrow you should worry about. Are you two going to be? We've survived worse, Reese said. Believe me. I got through the rest of the evening by staying in different parts of the room from everyone involved, and talking with exhausting focus to people I barely knew. Beckett caught a cab home alone. I took an Uber, sitting in the back seat with my shoes off and my head against the window, watching the city lights blur past and trying to figure out how I had managed to light a bomb under the best relationship I'd ever been in. The next morning, Beckett came over. He sat in my kitchen and I made coffee, and we were both extremely careful, in the way of people handling something they don't want to break further. He listened while I explained. The low light, the champagne, the suit that looked the same. The way I'd reached for him without thinking, the way the whole thing had been over before my brain registered what was happening. I told him about the coffee shop. I told him about the weeks after, the thoughts I hadn't acted on, and had also been too honest with myself to pretend weren't there. He sat with all of it for a long time. The kiss I can let go, he said finally. You thought I was me. I understand that, okay. The rest of it I can't. He looked at his coffee cup. Because of you. Because I think for a while you've been somewhere else, and I've been pretending not to notice. I haven't been, Vivienne. His voice was gentle. That was the worst part. I told you I wasn't good at this. But I have been trying, I've been paying attention. He paused. Have you? I opened my mouth, I closed it. In the silence that followed, we both got the answer. We broke up that morning. It was quiet and sad, and there was no screaming, no doors slamming, no dramatic exit. He finished his coffee. He hugged me once, briefly, with the careful restraint of someone who's decided to do the hard thing with grace. He said he hoped I was happy, and I believed him, which made it worse. Then he left. I sat in my kitchen for an hour not moving. I thought about calling my best friend Jules. I thought about calling my mother. I didn't call either of them. I just sat there with the evidence of what I'd broken, laid out in front of me like a before, and after that only went one direction. Here's the thing about Reese that I didn't understand until later. He didn't reach out. Not the next day. Not the week after. I half expected him to. Part of me wanted him to, which was its own shameful admission, but he didn't. No text, no call, nothing. Whatever had happened at the gala, he had apparently decided it was not an invitation. I respected him for that. I also resented him for it slightly, which I understood was not fair. 6 weeks passed. I threw myself into work the way you do when you're trying to outrun your own head. I accepted every after-work invitation I'd been declining for months. I rearranged my apartment, which accomplished nothing, but was extremely satisfying in the moment. I had several long phone calls with Jules, in which she was warm, and also relentlessly honest, in the way that only a 10-year friendship gives you the license to be. You didn't ruin a good thing, she said during one of those calls. You realized a true thing. There's a difference. I humiliated him in front of everyone at his company's event. You kissed the wrong person by accident in a dark room. That's not humiliation. That's a bad night. The part after was honest, she said. Beckett is going to be fine. He seems like the kind of person who processes things and moves forward. He is, actually. So stop wearing it like a hair shirt and figure out what you actually want. I thought about what I actually wanted for 6 weeks. That's a long time to think about one thing, and I don't recommend it as a strategy, but I couldn't seem to do it faster. What I kept coming back to was not a feeling but a fact. Both times I'd talked to Rice, I'd left feeling more like myself than I had going in. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't, to me. I'd spent a lot of years being a slightly edited version of myself, around people who I was trying to impress or accommodate or not scare away, and there was something about the way he talked to me. Direct, a little dry, entirely uninterested in performance, that made that editing feel unnecessary. I was also aware that this was exactly the kind of reasoning people used to justify terrible decisions, so I held it at arm's length and looked at it from several directions before I trusted it. In November, I saw Edmund Harlow at a charity event for a children's hospital. One of those things you get invited to through work, where you spend an evening being generously photographed writing a check. He was there with Patricia, who waved at me immediately from across the room and came over to hug me in a way that made it clear nobody had briefed her on recent events. Edmund was more careful. He shook my hand, asked how I was, asked about my new firm. He was perfectly pleasant and told me precisely nothing about either of his sons. As I was leaving, he caught up with me near the coat check. "Vivienne, Mr. Harlow." He studied me for a moment with those gray eyes that both his sons had inherited. "Beckett's well, Elle," he said. "If you were wondering, I'm glad Reese is in Boston for the month." A pause. "Working on something of his own. First time in a while he's seemed settled." I didn't respond. Edmund looked at me a beat longer. "He doesn't make things easy," he said. I wasn't certain which son he meant. Maybe both, but the things worth having usually don't. He nodded once, collected his coat, and left with Patricia. I stood there in the coat check line thinking about that for a long time. In December, 8 weeks after the gala, my phone rang on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner. I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't pick up. Vivienne. I knew his voice immediately. I set down the knife I was holding. "Rise high." A pause. I should have called sooner. I kept talking myself out of it. Why? Because of Beckett mostly. And because I wasn't sure what I wanted to say. Another pause. "I'm still not entirely sure. I'm calling anyway." I leaned against the kitchen counter. Outside, Chicago in December was doing what it does, gray and cold and relentless. The city through my window looked like a smudge of light in the dark. "How are you?" I asked. "Better than I was." He said it like it was a real answer, not a courtesy. "You? Getting there. Good." I heard him exhale. "I want to see you, if that's something you'd want. And if it's not, I'll stop calling. And we can both agree tonight was just a weird phone call that never happened." I thought about the coffee shop. The way the rain had made everything smell like wet pavement. And he'd made me laugh about 3 different things in under an hour. The gala. The way he'd said, "Are you okay?" in a room full of people who weren't asking. "It's something I'd want," I said. He took me to dinner the following Saturday. Not French food, not a client-favorite institution. A neighborhood Thai place in Andersonville that he'd apparently been going to for years, where the owner called him by name. And the menu was 4 pages long, and we took forever to order, because we kept asking each other what the other person was getting. We talked for 4 hours. Nobody checked their phone. I laughed more in that dinner than I had in the previous 2 months combined. Walking to the car afterward, he stopped on the sidewalk. "I need to say something," he said. "Okay, I know how we got here. I know the last few months have been a mess and that I was part of that, even if I was trying not to be." He looked at me steadily. "I'm not going to promise I'm easy to know. I have a complicated history with my brother and a father who has opinions and a tendency to disappear into work for months at a time. I know all that. I know you know." He paused. "I'm telling you anyway, so you're not surprised when it's hard." Something caught in my chest. Because I'd heard those words before. Not quite the same, but close. "I'm not good at this. I'm telling you ahead of time. So you're not surprised." I looked at him. "Harlow family script?" I said. He blinked. Then he laughed. That real, unguarded laugh from the first night I'd seen him, walking through his father's door. God, did he say something like that? First date, he would. He shook his head. Then his expression settled, and he looked at me the way he had at the gala, right before everything tilted sideways, like he was surprised steady at the same time. "I mean it, though." "I know," I said. "I'm not surprised." He smiled, and it was nothing like his brother's careful, restrained version of a smile. It was wide and a little reckless and entirely itself. We walked back to his car in the cold, and the city did what it always does, held everything at once, all the mess and the noise and the impossible distances between people and the way they sometimes, against all reasonable odds, get closed. I won't tell you it was simple after that, it wasn't. The first time Beckett and Reese were in the same room while I was there. Edmund's Christmas dinner, which I almost didn't go to and then went to, because Reese said "I don't want you to hide," and that was the right thing to say, was one of the most uncomfortable 3 hours of my life. Beckett was exactly what I knew he would be. Composed, gracious, and in complete control of every emotion he'd decided not to show. He shook my hand like he would shake anyone's hand. He asked about my new firm. He said nothing he didn't mean, and nothing that wasn't appropriate, and I have never admired and felt worse about someone, at the same time so acutely. At one point, while Reese was helping in the kitchen, and Beckett and I were briefly, inescapably alone near the fireplace, he said quietly, "He's better with people than I am. He always has been." "Beckett, that's not self-pity," he said. "That's just true." He looked toward the kitchen, where I could hear Rhys arguing cheerfully with Patricia about something. A small smile crossed his face, the most unguarded thing I'd ever seen from him. "He makes things feel possible. I make things feel managed." He looked back at me. "You needed possible." I didn't know what to say to that. "Take care of each other," he said, and then Edmund came in from the hallway, and the moment was over, and Beckett went to greet his father with the same composure he brought to everything. I stood at that fireplace for a minute, alone. Then Reese appeared in the doorway with a dish towel over his shoulder, looked at me and said, "Patricia is trying to make me eat her fruitcake, and I need you to come rescue me immediately." I laughed. I followed him into the kitchen. That was 2 years ago now. Reese is still complicated. His relationship with Beckett thaws a little each year, and then freezes again when one of them says something careless, the way it does with people who share a deep wound and are both too stubborn to be the one who tends to it first. His father still has opinions. He still disappears into work in ways that require us to have the same conversation about communication every 4 or 5 months. And we have that conversation, and then things get better for a while. And I've decided that's what maintenance looks like in a real relationship, as opposed to the version I'd previously only seen in movies. But here's what I know. I am not a version of myself around him. I am just myself. The anxious, funny, occasionally too direct, small-town Ohio kid pretending to be a city person self that I spent years trying to smooth into something more presentable. He doesn't want the smoothed version. He specifically said so. Last month, in the kitchen of the apartment we share now in Lincoln Square, while I was reading and he was doing something on his laptop that he claimed was work and was clearly not work, he looked up and said, out of nowhere, "You know that night at the gala?" I looked up from my book. "Yeah, I knew it was happening before it happened," he said. "When I saw you across the room." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was reporting the weather. I thought, that's going to complicate things. And then it did, and then it did. He turned back to his laptop. Worth it, though. I looked at him for a moment, the familiar line of his shoulders, the way he always left 3 empty espresso cups on the desk when he worked, the small smile at the corner of his mouth that he thought I couldn't see. "Yeah," I said. "Worth it." Outside, the city kept going, and in the apartment in Lincoln Square, everything was exactly as complicated and imperfect and real as I'd been promised it would be. That turned out to be enough.